Right now on Amplified, how ordinary engineers achieve extraordinary things.
If you're an engineer, you can do anything else and it nearly makes you a better thing. So for example, maybe I want to do law, but I really am excited about engineering. I would say do engineering because guess what? Engineers infinitely make better lawyers. Learning engineering is really about learning a way of thinking, and it's one that allows you to understand nuance, complexity, difficult challenges that you can apply to literally any other career. I can do anything with my engineering degree.
Hello there, my name is Dusty Rhodesy. Welcome to Amplified, the Engineers Journal podcast. A lot of engineering is thinking about what is possible and then setting out to make it a reality. Our guest today is an expert at doing this because she has pushed the envelope of engineering literally to its limits. As a teenager in Armagh, she decided that she wants to work with NASA and spent many years there working on models to understand which mission design from a possible million would be the one best one. Today, as well as working on AI and how some tech platforms are more powerful than countries, she's also found time to set up a record company, work in a 2-star Michelin restaurant and study for a diploma in wine. So, if you're thinking, how do I make my career dreams come true? I think our guest today is going to have a few answers and a little inspiration for you. It's a pleasure to welcome Sinead O'Sullivan. Sinead, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Listen, let me start off with, your career is just a dazzling array of accomplishments. Can you just kind of bring me back to the start and tell me the story of how your journey began into aerospace engineering?
Yeah, I was really, really lucky when I was younger that I got to go to space camp in Houston. They have an international camp. And so it's something like 45 students from 36 different countries attend every year. And I was lucky enough to go and represent Northern Ireland. And I got to spend time with the engineers at NASA. And it just put this very kind of human, normal person face on this career that seemed totally inaccessible. And I remember coming back and telling people that, yeah, I want to be an aerospace engineer and I'm going to work at NASA. And they would look at me as if I had 3 heads. But I had met very normal people who had done it and it was no big deal for them. So I kind of thought, well, why can't I do that too?
The footing with NASA, you get the gig with NASA. From my limited knowledge of NASA, they're either talking about going to the ISS, the International Space Station, going to the moon, or going to Mars. Which one of these were you involved in?
So I actually did human spaceflight mission design. So anything that involves, very simply, there's human and then non-human, your kind of robotic mission design. I was involved in the planning of anything that involved humans in the loop. So if there was an astronaut involved in some capacity, that would have fallen into my bracket. And yeah, there were a couple, at any given time, we were designing, maybe upwards of 10 different missions. Now, not all of those missions would make it through to being fully funded and something that we would actually work on, but we would look at lots of, ideate lots of different types of missions, and then some would get further along. So for example, the mission to Mars is one that, is quite famous and has made it very far along in its trajectory. There were a couple that I worked on that unfortunately did not make it as far along. One of them is what was known as the asteroid redirect mission, which is where a close flyby asteroid would be captured by this kind of robotic arm type thing as it went past the Earth atmosphere. And it would be brought then into lunar orbit, a retrograde orbit. So just an orbit around the moon. And we would then send humans back and forth to that asteroid for mining purposes. Now, the reason for that being that we would get to test a lot of the mining equipment that we wanted to send to Mars in a much closer and safer way than sending it to Mars and hoping for the best. And because we also wanted to test some other human-related mission components that were safer done closer to Earth on the moon rather than Mars. Very interesting set of projects, and NASA's doing a lot of very interesting work at any given time. And sorry, you mentioned earlier that I choose the best mission out of a million. statistically, and so a lot of the work that I did was kind of looking at the statistics and the number of combinations of different types of missions and trying to optimize for the overall mission design. And you're looking at hundreds of trillions, not a million. And so it becomes this, we would use supercomputers to try and optimize one small part of this, and the code on that supercomputer might take 5 days to run. And then you realize you have a bug on day 4 and you restart it. But yeah, very exciting types of work that NASA's doing that I got to play a very small role in.
You mentioned about mining on an asteroid a great distance away from us, and it kind of almost brings that back to engineering here on Earth, because you're thinking about greenfield sites and brownfield sites, and nothing is more greenfield than an asteroid. They're completely barren. I mean, do you have the same kind of problems, if you like, in from a different perspective, but are they at the core of them, are they the same problems that regular engineers have?
Well, I mean, NASA engineers are regular engineers. We kind of put these people on pedestals and make it seem like it's impossible to do what they're doing. Yeah. I mean, they're just regular people that went to university and got a job and have families and go to work 9 to 5. Now the problems that they work on are a little more abstract because they're not testing it every day. They might test it once or twice in their career if they're lucky. I mean, if you look at the Mars rover, for example, Curiosity and Endeavour, I mean, I got to spend time with those engineers as they were testing it live. I was in mission control as that landed. I mean, seeing the face of engineers after they've worked on something 24/7 for 8 years straight, and then it works. I mean, that's amazing. But these are very normal people doing normal engineering jobs. One of the closest analogies I would have and I did a lot of kind of underwater robotics work for the US Navy. Anyone that's working with water is essentially working with a very similar environment to space. You've got very high pressure, temperature differentials. Stuff move, it sounds so simple, but stuff just moves in ways that you kind of, is hard to control for. It's hard to see, sensors don't work that well. So if if you have this underwater robotic and you're trying to find something, there's shear, there's glean. It's sensors just don't work that well. Everything gets wet, everything gets hot or really cold. So the closest analogy to kind of an on-Earth environment would definitely be underwater, which is why so many of the astronauts that you see graduating from NASA's astronaut programs have come from institution like Woods Hole, which is kind of oceanographic research center. But yeah, no, these engineers are regular engineers. They're building very normal stuff, and there's a reason that JCB is one of the larger lunar mining research kind of institutions. These are not totally abstract. Some of it feels very abstract, sure, but yeah.
So engineers at NASA are like engineers all over the world, okay? Very intelligent, very curious people, always looking for a solution. The problems that get thrown at you are, as you say, abstract or unusual, but the solving problems, your thought process, the method is the same. So can you give me an example then of a problem that you were given where you would have used the same method to figure it out?
I can give you dozens. I mean, what my specialization was actually in, and I came from a kind of a world-renowned center, academic center, which created engineering methodologies. And so the methodologies that we would use at NASA were exactly the same engineering methodologies that were used for Boeing designing aircraft. I have classmates. I went to Queen's University in Belfast, and I have classmates that went on to work for Spirit Shorts in Belfast. They worked for Airbus. They would use these same methodologies, except the difference is that we would get to test ours slightly less often, and it would be a lot more kind of hypothetical, which is why, the budgets for ours were extremely different. The budget for a spaceflight program is infinitely larger than I shouldn't say infinitely larger, but it's significantly larger than most kind of Earth-constrained problems. So I'd say the big difference is that you have to get really, really creative in how you think about testing some of this stuff. You spend a lot of time modeling how you think things are going to react, the behavior, the interaction between, different levels of gravity, or, you spend a lot of time modeling components and how they might interact. And then you hope to God that those models work because you've just built a whole thing around that. There's less of a feedback loop. So that's probably the big difference with a lot of the stuff.
But what about that? You say you need to get creative. How do you get creative with these problems?
Going back to the space camp thing, I went to mentor and to be one of the mentors at space camp. And you have these 16-year-olds and they're kind of throwing out ideas like, why don't we just do some hyperloop kind of magnetic, launch system? And you're thinking, I don't know if that's, okay, sure, why not? Or a space elevator or something like that. And you kind of think, that doesn't seem very realistic or practical. But then several years later, you hear in the news that there is now a company that's being funded with hundreds of millions of dollars to do these things. And so one of the most amazing things about the space and the aerospace industry, I find, is that it actually really helps you to not lose that sense of anything is possible that you have at a young age. Because it is literally, and I spend so much time with people at NASA and the Jet Propulsion Lab and other really cool places, and they spitball ideas as if they're 5 years old. Like, why don't we just do this? And the adult in you says, well, budget, there's 10 million different reasons why that's not going to work. But you have to really, really restrain yourself and say, actually, forget about all of those kind of other reasons. The technology in that could actually work. So then you realize, is the problem with a lot of our science R&D actually the inability to get the politicians on board, the financing on board? And that's kind of the direction that I moved in with my career, because I realized that there are a ton of really smart engineers that are solving these problems at any given time that we have. But the problem really, I think, lies with the bureaucracy of how we fund science, how we create policy around that. And it's like, if we could just give money to these people that are like, let's build a space elevator, without thinking about the technological or the other kind of constraints, we would probably have 16-year-olds building really sophisticated solutions to problems that we've been trying to solve for a really long time. So I kind of feel like, to be creative, you have to, like, as you get older, right? And like, you're going to know this, everyone feels it. The child in you gets smaller and smaller and smaller. The child that would have said, just do this or that. But you have to kind of let that child grow up with you. Like, if you really want to be good at doing these types of jobs, don't let people tell you they're dumb ideas.
Another part of that is going to make a bigger impression, I think, in the future, and you must have had experience of this, is robots and automation, because obviously you can't send humans to asteroids or to Mars, or, hopefully we're going back to the moon. But robot, and I've seen a lot of stuff where they're talking about building a base on the moon, but it will be built by automated robots before a single man or woman lands there. And I find that's amazing. Have you gotten involved in this, have you?
I haven't done anything specifically on lunar construction, but I did a lot of work on autonomous systems.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about, robots and automation. Yeah, tell me more.
I mean, it's really incredible. We live in an interesting period at the minute, because I've spent many years working on kind of robotics and autonomous systems. And now we're at the stage where the difference between an autonomous system, the work that it can do, the constraints that there are in how we should expect these systems to work, and kind of societal expectations of an understanding of these systems are not that well understood. So for example, there are two types of people generally, and people will kind of fall into one of these two categories. You're either somebody who thinks never going to happen. How could a robot do something that humans do? And even AI, but let's stick with robots and automation, autonomous systems for a minute. And then there are people who think these things are going to do everything and they're going to kill us and they're going to kill everyone. And people typically fall very quickly into one of those two categories. Having built some of the most sophisticated autonomous systems for the Department of Defense, particularly, as I mentioned, underwater. So I spent quite a bit of time working on underwater autonomous systems, which is the hardest environment that you can really build a system in, because it doesn't ever really know where it is, because things move constantly underwater. GPS, oh my God, GPS does not work underwater. How do you locate yourself? Like if you have a system of 3 different robots and they're trying to do something together, how do they know where each other are? Sure, you can use some underwater telemetry, but because of the refraction of water itself, it's actually really hard to do this very quickly. You cannot, and one of the hardest things to do is to get underwater systems to communicate with each other. And there's a lot actually that we can learn from underwater systems when we're trying to think about how autonomous cars communicate with each other when there's high traffic and there's a lot of noise that blocks out signal. But yeah, there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening there. And I think I kind of want to ask people, whatever bucket they fall into, like, oh, it's going to fix everything, or, oh, it's going to kill us all, to kind of have some restraint there and look at where they're really good and what they're really, really good at doing and where they're just not as good. And I kind of like to think of autonomous systems as being a tool that humans use, never in a full replacement capacity, but that we can use to make our lives better and easier and faster and, whatever, that help us in some capacity, but not in a full replacement mode, and certainly not in a way that, this robot got this super intelligence of its own and is going to kill us now. I know a lot of people talk about that.
Sinead, I want to move on and just ask you about how you think about life, all right? Because working for NASA is a lofty ambition. And you were talking about the kid inside you, and the kid goes, yeah, of course you can, all right? And a lot of us lose that as we get older. But you've done NASA, you've done so many other things in your life, and they're all like lofty ambitions. They're the kind of, well, I'd love to study to be a wine expert, or I'd love to be able to cook. You've done all these things, you're writing books and all that kind of stuff. How is it that your brain works that when you get a crazy idea in your head, you go from crazy idea to actually doing it and achieving it?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think you answered it in your question, and I've kind of discussed it before, but like, I'd say if there was one thing I learned when I was younger, like maybe 16, 17, when I feel like I was making career decisions that stayed with me, is that I met people that did extraordinary things, and they're just ordinary people. And I think there's something about that made me, like, I internalized the idea that there's literally nothing that you cannot do. I mean, I've been so lucky that I've spent time with, my friends have just done amazing stuff, and I see them on their on their kind of process and on their journey, and they're not easy things to do. Like, you have to kind of really want to do them, and grit and determination and resiliency. But nothing feels like it's impossible for me. And I don't think that's necessarily an ego thing. Like I am never the smartest person in the room. And I actually, I did not get the best grades at school. Probably people laughed at me when I said I was going to go to NASA because I wasn't ever the top of my class. And, but I know that normal people can do extraordinary things. And I've met a ton of them. And at a young age, if you develop this idea of having agency, like, I can go and do those things. And sure, it might take you a while to figure out how to do them. But yeah, that sounds insane, but nothing actually feels impossible to me. And the crazy thing, once you understand that, because it's 100% true, the hard part is actually not trying to do those things, because again, I fully believe that anyone can do anything if they put enough hard work into it. No one is born with the ability to be the best at anything. The hard part is actually figuring out what thing you want to do, if you can do anything. because there are so many things to do. And so the hard part every day is waking up and being like, what do I really want to dedicate the next month, 6 months, year, 5 years to doing? What is the goal? And once you've decided on the goal, I mean, it really is just a matter of going and doing it and sticking at it.
A lot of engineers will have dreams, as we all do, and they say, "I want to build the first, 50-story skyscraper in Ireland, or I want to run my own farm, or I want to do something, crazy in the middle of the Atlantic, or whatever." And they have you kind of just get stuck in a rut, and you don't move on. And I've heard two things that I have found to be true, and I just want to ask you if you have found them to be true. Number one is you have those crazy ideas and you think, okay, great, I'm going to do it, all right? You should try and hang out with the people that you want to be like. So if you want to be a millionaire, hang out with millionaires, all right? And the other thing is that when you start hanging out with the people that you want to be like, they're more giving because they're ahead of you. And it's just a natural thing in life where kind of, somebody who's climbing up the ladder doesn't want somebody in their way, but somebody who's behind is not important. So you're quite happy to go, oh, yeah, well, listen, if you want to do NASA, here's the thing. And you go through the whole steps of them and you get all that. Have you found that also to be true in your career?
Yeah, you've nailed it. I mean, so many people don't understand that 90% of trying to do something hard isn't about sure, you need the technical skills, right? So like for engineering is a great example. I can't be an engineer at NASA if I don't understand math. There is a basic requirement, technically. But I think once you have that, like how many engineers are there in the world? So many, but not everyone gets to work at NASA. I say that these are ordinary people, but, there are few of them and it's a very prestigious job. But I think what people don't quite understand, and it took me a really, really long time to understand this, is that most of the stuff that you learn about how to actually get these jobs and do them is like implicit learning. It's not in a textbook. It's not written down anywhere. It's the kind of stuff that you only pick up. It's a mentality. It's how to go about things. It's how you communicate that you only really learn when you spend time with the people that are doing it. And so there's this kind of insider-outsider perspective, which is hard. Like it is unbelievably hard to break through. But if you spend time with the people that are doing those things, you don't even realize that you're learning how to be one of those people. And then you wake up one day and you are one of them. And there's so much of the world is about implicit learning, which is why during COVID, when people stopped going to offices, I felt really bad for younger people because they're not implicitly learning these things. They might be sitting doing a spreadsheet or using CAD or something. But to be a great engineer, you need to be around great engineers. When you surround yourself with people that you want to be like or you find interesting, and it's not in a weird or superficial way. I mean, just people that you like and you find interesting and you aspire to be, you become one of them over time. I fully believe that we are the sum of the people that we spend the closest amount of time or the most amount of time with. And I'm lucky that I got to travel a lot and meet really cool people all over the world. And I would like to think that I'm a sum of these very cool, interesting people. That's not to say I am cool and interesting, but it's more likely that I will be if I spend time with people like that.
Very, very true. I'm going to hit you now with the strangest twist in an interview that I've ever had in my entire career. Because we've been talking about, career moves. We've been talking about NASA. We've been talking, building crazy things underwater and on remote asteroids and stuff like that. And now we're going to talk about Taylor Swift.
Oh my gosh.
And it's all related to everything that we have been talking about, okay? Because you've written a book called Good Ideas and Power Moves. Link is in the description of the podcast for you. But Taylor Swift almost embodies everything you've been talking about. Tell me about this.
I listened to a lot of Taylor Swift music and I followed her quite closely, her kind of personal and professional trials and tribulations. I've seen her as somebody who just does exactly the stuff that I've talked about. And I've always felt really amazed by somebody like her.
So give me an example of something Taylor did that relates to what we were talking about.
I mean, more recently, she re-recorded all of her albums, and literally every executive under the sun told her not to do that. She went against a private equity firm with more than $1 trillion behind it, which told her not to do that, and she still did it. And statistically, it was much more likely than not that what she was doing was career suicide. But she just very strongly believed in it, and she had a gut instinct about it, and it worked in her favor for lots of various different reasons. It could easily not have done. But I just feel like, that is one example of somebody who, she still has that child inside of her that says, actually, this is what I want to do. And this is what I'm going to do. And this is what I believe in. And I don't care if the spreadsheets or Wall Street or whoever, these kind of childless, soulless people tell me that I'm wrong. I'm just going to go and do it and see what happens. And this is the path that I'm going to take. I just think she's just incredibly young, fun, courageous. And I just think she's done a lot of really, really interesting stuff. I mean, again, she is someone against whom the odds have been completely stacked. And she wasn't always as successful as she is today. And a lot of people probably don't remember the years when everyone hated her. And a lot of people would have given up and been like, okay, well, I had a good career so far. I should be thankful for that. And, now I'm going to retire because I've made a ton of money and the time in the limelight is over for me. Yeah. She didn't do that. She kind of forged her own very, very atypical path. Any executive in the music industry would not have told any of their musicians to do what she did at any given stage of that.
So would it be true then that Taylor Swift's problem solving, the brain of Taylor Swift, the way it solves problems and the way it makes decisions, is something we should learn from?
I definitely think so. It kind of frustrates me. We were talking earlier about, being creative. And I think that not a lot of people for a very long time took her seriously. I first started to write about Taylor Swift in a more business kind of professional finance capacity several years before, kind of the mainstream, oh, she's amazing and oh, she's making so much money, started to happen. And I remember, because I write for the Financial Times, having an argument with my editor there, trying to get a piece published about her several years ago. And they said, no, I mean, she's just a musician, she's just so-and-so. But the reality is that, and we now know that she was never just so-and-so, she was never just a musician. But getting back to my point, which is that you kind of have to look outside of the box in terms of who's doing something that's really interesting or unique. And there's, in the same way that adults, part of you will be like, oh, never going to work, bureaucracy, politics, finance, whatever. You have to have that remove that same mask when you look at who is inspiring you or where you find your creativity. A lot of people would, for most of her career, did not view her as a serious person. In the same way that most engineers don't go to art museums to try and find, something that's going to inspire the next NASA mission. But if you want to be creative, you have to look at people just doing weird stuff that is not on this kind of escalator of a career and learn something from that.
Yeah, one of the things you said at the start of our conversation was it's ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And Taylor Swift is a great example of that because she's just a girl, where was it, Philadelphia or the state of... Where is she from?
Oh, Pennsylvania.
Oh, Pennsylvania, that's it, sorry. So she's from the state of Pennsylvania, small town Pennsylvania, and, she'd no major, her dad wasn't a pop star or anything like that, but she just came from that and she had the determination, and many people have seen the video of her sitting as a 14-year-old singing beside some river or whatever, and there was nobody there, all right? And I think the same thing about Ed Sheeran. Because he was a redheaded kid, all right? Not blessed with the looks, bless him, all right? But he said, I want to be a pop star. And he was a terrible singer when he was a kid.
So this is my favorite example. And I actually wrote about him in the book. And this is exactly what I refer to. And Taylor Swift writes about it in her lyrics frequently.
Yeah.
She was never born like this. She had to work so damn hard to get to where she is today. And I fully believe that, oh my God, I was never, if you had have asked my math teacher when I was 15 if I was going to go to NASA, they would have laughed, honestly. But
if you have that dream and you have that crazy idea, you will then do the work that takes to get there.
I believe that. And that's why I'm a professor of aerospace engineering, and I teach a lot of undergrad engineering, and they kind of all ask me for career advice at certain stages, even after they've kind of long graduated. It's always really nice to hear from previous students. And they're always kind of, there's a choice that they have to make. Should I do this thing and it's stable and I know it and it's a great career, and or this other thing? And I was going to say, like, you're asking me this question because you're interested in this other thing. Otherwise you would have said no. You would have taken it. But like, and this isn't great advice for everybody. And I acknowledge that, this works for me and it works for a small number of people. But like, my entire career has been curiosity driven, for the simple reason that if I'm really interested in it, I'm going to work hard enough at it to be successful in it. If I'm not interested in it, like, there's just no way I'm ever going to be good at it. Because there's nothing, nobody is born with a single talent that they're good enough at to get them to the top without trying. And so it's like, what are the things that I'm excited about? Because those are the things that I'm going to get off at 8 o'clock in the morning and be like, I can't wait to pick up where I left off yesterday. And so it's like, do the thing that you really love. And when I was younger, I remember, and in Ireland, I think so many people might have experienced this, but if you get good grades, they try to, especially in science, they try to tell you should be a doctor. And that's a great job for a lot of people. It just never even entered, like, I just didn't even think about it, because I just very specifically had decided I was going to go work for NASA. And I remember at the time the school being like, okay, cool, but just go and do medicine. And I just had no interest. I would have failed. I just would have failed medical school. I just wouldn't have been able to pass it. It would have been too boring for me.
Yeah.
Not to say that it's boring, but for me, I just didn't find it interesting.
But I think it's one of those things where you find the thing or whatever, you go, that's what I want to do. And very, very few people have that. A lot of people, as you say, they go through school and they go to numbers and they get the grades and they go, I'll go be a lawyer, be a doctor, they're
be
great
an accountant
and whatever. Be an accountant, whatever, and they make great money, but their hearts aren't in it. I find most of the engineers that I speak to are not like that, because there was always something about engineering where they kind of went, I love a really good problem. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
and that's why they got into engineering.
I work with a lot of people in finance at the minute, and have done for the last few years. And I remember when I went to Harvard Business School, I'd gone from working at NASA where people, it would be midnight on a Friday night and I'd be running code and people would grab a few beers and watch, like, it was like a hobby and a job all in one, and everyone was super excited about what everyone else was doing. And then I remember going to Harvard Business School and being with a ton of kind of hedge fund, private equity, investment banking type people. And they hated their jobs. And there was no part of them that wanted to ever be in the office. And I remember thinking at the time, like, wow, this is the difference between, an engineer has, like I said, has the ability to make a ton of money in so many different ways that are not engineering. So you can go into accounting, you can go into banking, you can be a doctor, and a lot of the time you'll be pushed into those areas. But the engineers are the people who kind of say, I actually don't want to do that. I want to do this other thing. And they're very specific about that thing being engineering. They've chosen engineering, which is why I love working with engineers, because they choose to be there every day when they have alternatives. People that work in finance and this is not to say that they're bad or horrible or boring.
No, I know what you mean.
I've met a lot of people in finance and they're very cool, but nobody wakes up in the morning as a 15-year-old and like, I cannot wait to be an accountant. With engineering, you have to choose that. And there's something so amazing with working with people who are passionate about what they're doing. You can't replace, like, there's no amount of money in the world, salary-wise, that you can replace working with cool, interested people with.
Describe to me the feeling you get when you are working with cool, interesting people and you have this enormous problem and then you come up with an idea and then you fix it. What's that feeling like when you go, it worked?
It's priceless. To see something that you've built work is priceless. And people feel this at a really young age. And this is the thing that they lose, I think, when they get older, this kind of problem solving, because problems get more complex and they get more kind of ethereal, and so many more people are involved in fixing it that no one really takes ownership over it. But when you're a kid, right, and you're building Lego and the thing works, you're like, huh. You know, I've been working with chefs recently, like top chefs at a 2-star Michelin restaurant. I see the same thing. It's engineering. They see it they built something, and there's a reason that they work 18-hour days every day. It's because they get so much satisfaction from the thing that they made than going and working. There's something about that it's like doing a hobby and getting paid for it, that just doesn't get replicated in finance when your spreadsheet tells you you're going to make money. You know, there's something so satisfying about building or designing, and even if it doesn't work, because 99% of the time it doesn't work, right? And no one talks about that.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Even if it doesn't work, you've always learned something. So, you know, it's not a failed exercise by any accounts. Listen, let me wrap up our conversation, just kind of looking to the future, because I think you might have a better idea than most of us. AI and big tech is what everybody are talking about. I'm wondering what you know of AI is going to help engineers with problem solving and decision making. What do you see coming down the line?
I will give you a good example in biotech, which is where we've kind of seen some of the impacts of AI. Actually, even in terms of the type of work that I did at NASA, which is very statistically driven types of work. So let's say you have a needle and a haystack. A lot of the work at NASA that I did was trying to find the needle, which is a mission that was like the optimal mission in amongst the haystack. And we wrote a lot of code, and a lot of the stuff that I did was writing optimization and kind of what would kind of now be considered like AI algorithms to try and find that needle faster and faster and faster. In the same way that in biotech, you're trying to find chemical solutions to health problems. So let's say that there are a trillion different ways that enzymes can work together in a vaccine to do something. Well, it used to be that scientists would have to go through one by one testing each of these to realize that it worked or didn't work. Now we have AI that can nearly do this in the blink of an eye, where we used to need supercomputers at NASA. I mean, one of my friends at the Jet Propulsion Lab has a side curiosity in biology and ran the code for the COVID vaccine the week that it was released, the week that the paper on that was released. He was able to do that on his home computer and validated that it worked. So we have this kind of shift in computational ability to do some of the grunt work that people would have done. And I think right now that's where we are, that this has just become such an amazing tool that should, and I think will, allow us to say, okay, I used to spend 18 hours a day for 4 years trying to get to this point that I was able to get at in 3.5 seconds using AI. Now that I'm there, the really hard stuff can start. The hard work really begins of trying to figure out, how does this vaccine interact with complex systems? How do we get this mission through Congress? The New Yorker just wrote an amazing piece on writing, because people are convinced that it's going to kill the work of writers and journalists. And it's like, writing is also this kind of combinatorial problem. There are 8 trillion different ways that you can write a sentence. A writer has to specifically choose one. And it's like, what are the constraints? Who is it writing for? Writing doesn't happen in a vacuum. You have to think about your readers and what emotions you're trying to convey. So there's this higher level thinking that an engineer, a writer, a biotechnologist has to make, where they look at the complex world around them the markets, financing, policy. And that's the part that I think a human is uniquely good at doing, and humans will uniquely do, but they'll just be doing it so much faster and better with the use of tools like AI.
So AI is a good thing, in a short sentence.
Yes, there are, again, like autonomous systems, people think it's either going to kill us or make us redundant or no, it's a really great tool. And actually, I was giving a talk with the editor of The Economist recently, and he had a really good line, which I'm going to steal here, which is that, ChatGPT, for example, everyone's talking about ChatGPT. ChatGPT is like having an intern. They do a lot of work for you, but you still have to go through it and make sure that they didn't screw it up anywhere, make sure if it's correct. But that intern is never going to replace the writer or the editor. But it certainly helps them. So they're tools. All of these things that we build are tools. We can decide what we want to do with them. Even, oh my God, even if there was a runaway rogue AI that tried to kill us all, we can decide to do something about that because we have agency, right? Like, we're not stuck in a vacuum with this stuff happening to us. That's why we have policy and law and regulation. So I'm not worried about it. I'm excited about it.
I'm excited about it as well. I'm a little bit tin hat about it as well. And another third of me just keeps thinking about the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, The Terminator, where Skynet eventually... Yeah, there you go. So, but it's the future and nobody knows. Listen, to wrap up today, Sinead, it's been absolutely fascinating. Is there anything else or any final thoughts that you would like to share on engineering and stuff like that with our audience? Yeah,
I mean... Here's the thing that, I get a lot of younger people asking me if they should do engineering or something, or how to think about like a career in engineering at that stage. And I guess my guiding principle, because I still make career decisions every day, like even adults have to think about things all the time. And I always think about a couple of things. One is like, am I going to have fun doing this? And I kind of optimize nearly all of my career decisions for fun. Because I don't think jobs have to be boring. That's so dumb. Having a boring job is a choice, but one that I've never made. The other thing is that I always try to choose something that gives me more optionality. So for example, medicine, my sister's a doctor. There are very few things that she can do that is not being a doctor, now that she's done her 12 years of training. If you're an engineer, you can do anything else and it nearly makes you a better thing. So for example, if you think down the line, maybe I want to do law, like something totally different, right? Maybe I want to do law, but I really am excited about engineering. I would say do engineering because guess what? Engineers infinitely make better lawyers. And I'll tell you one other thing. I have a friend who was an engineer, went into law. They make way more money if they understand technology. Way more money. So there's nearly, I've worked with engineers that have become traders. I can tell you one thing. They're better traders. Learning engineering is really about learning a way of thinking. And it's one that allows you to understand nuance, complexity, difficult challenges that you can apply to literally any other career. And so it's fun. You can be an engineer or you can be literally anything else once you have it. But there's no way that you're not going to enjoy the process of becoming it. And I think at the stage where you don't really know much about what you like and don't like and careers and jobs and what, I had no idea what engineers did. Like none when I chose to do engineering. But I love the people, and everyone fun that I've met was always an engineer. And so baby steps, just do what you think is fun. And the engineering you can use to double your success in any other career, should you decide at a later stage that that's not what you wanted to do. But yes, there's, people always ask me, if you could go back and do it again, what would you change? And like, absolutely nothing. I can do anything with my engineering degree.
And on that note, I'm going to say it's been hugely inspirational chatting with you. If you'd like to find out more about Sinead O'Sullivan and some of the topics that we spoke about today, you find notes and link details in the description area of this podcast. But for now, Sinead O'Sullivan, thank you so much for being so giving.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a ton of fun.
If you enjoyed our podcast today, do share with a friend in the business. Just tell them to search for Engineers Ireland on their podcast player. The podcast is produced by dustpod.io for Engineers Ireland. For pre-release episodes, more information on engineering across Ireland or career development opportunities, there are libraries of information on our website at engineersireland.ie. Until next time, from myself, Dusty Rhodes, thank you so much for listening.